drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission demanding is mission accomplished.
What's up, everybody? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with a Sunday Mailbag episode of You Got Boston. I'm really excited to be able to do this. Going to be doing this every Sunday and just kind of talk about things that are pertinent, things that are front of mind for all of you. So it's an opportunity to answer questions. It's an opportunity to kind of share my thoughts on the week related to all things Celtics. And this will be every single Sunday all year, including right now in August and September when things are a little bit slower. And, you know, we'll have some people message me questions in advance that I'll be sure to answer, but also want to be able to take questions live. And then this will be posted everywhere that the podcast streams. So on Spotify, Apple, and on YouTube, both on CLNS and otherwise. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Noa Dalzell. I cover the Celtics with CLNS Media and with SB Nation. I also cover the WNBA for SB Nation. I've been doing this for about a year and have thoroughly enjoyed the experience of being able to cover the Celtics. And so I will just say, you know, a lifelong follower of the NBA, followed the Celtics my whole life. And last year was my first season actually doing this. And obviously the Celtics won a championship. So I like to say that I'm 1 for 1 on that. And in general, you can see this streaming on Twitter. That's probably where most people are seeing this. But would recommend you tune in on YouTube so you're able to submit questions live. So with that, I'll just start off with a question that was commonly asked of me this week about thoughts on Jayson Tatum's performance with the Olympics so far. And I've talked about this a little bit on this podcast, so I don't want to go too in depth, but I will just say I do think that Tatum's been way overly scrutinized with his Olympics experience so far, just because in general, I think the Olympics, you know, should be evaluated more on a team level than an individual level. And I think that to date, there has been a lot of interest and a lot of just a lot going on as it relates to this, you know, the Olympics and just individual players and things. And I think that it should just be about whether the team is winning, whether the team is advancing forward. And that's kind of the one thing that I've noticed is just kind of a little bit of a misdirection. People are talking more about the individuals and less about the team. And then when you just watch the Olympics or across other sports, you don't see that. And so that's been a little bit frustrating just from a kind of basketball viewer standpoint, that it became kind of lost, that the end goal, the end objective is actually about the individual. And I think it's just because it's the NBA and it's, you know, very individual focused sport. So with that, I will begin to kind of go through questions in the chat and answer them. And I'm sure right now, you know, it's a pretty slow time of year, so I'm sure there are less questions than there will be during the playoffs or even during training camp and things. And I'm not in Paris, so I wish I was. I would be able to give you guys more behind the scenes stuff. But first question is about a Celtics repeat. I think the thing that stands out to me is the fact that they brought back the entire roster. It's pretty unusual to be able to do that, and they really brought everybody back except for 2 players, Shea Brissett and Svi Mykhailiuk, and that's not only good because the Celtics have a pretty complex defensive system, and I think that it's hard for players to just jump into it. And you see guys that got traded midseason last year, like Xavier Tillman and Jaden Springer, they're not able to play right away because there is just a sense of randomness with the Celtics defense that you have to just have experience in order to be able to build that and actually play with the team. And so the fact that they brought everybody back, there's not going to be that hiccup. One thing that I think is challenging is the fact that you have 3 guys that are playing the Olympics right now, and then you have Porzingis, who's going to be injured. So you're going to have to really rely on your bench. And I don't know that you're going to be able to, you know, that's a question mark because last year everybody was healthy. You need a lot of luck. You need a lot of health to be able to play. And yeah, I don't know that that'll be the case again this year. So that's the biggest threat is just injuries and health. And obviously you see like the Bucks last year in the playoffs, they didn't have Giannis, they didn't have Dame. So certainly that's going to be an obstacle. Those other teams got better. Did the Celtics get better? I would think that they did, just because you ultimately do have you ultimately do have guys that are in their primes or entering their primes. Maybe besides for Drew Holiday, who's not going to be getting better at this point in his career, but everybody else, you know, there's no reason to think that they're getting worse. And as far as chemistry and confidence, that's only building. So I would say they have as good a chance as any team to repeat, maybe aside from the KD Warriors. and a better chance than some of these recent teams that have lost key pieces, whether that's KCP or whether that's Bruce Brown from the Nuggets. I feel like every year in the last couple of years here, when the team has won a championship, they've immediately lost a key piece, and so Celtics obviously didn't lose that piece, and that's going to be kind of critical on its own. So that's my thoughts on that. But again, we'll see, because it really does depend. It really does make a difference, kind of what, the health piece. And also, again, if Tatum and Brown and those guys are going to come back and play the same level that they did last year, you just can't take that for granted. Next question here is from Tom Coolidge about whether Jayson Tatum's better all-around game yesterday will lead him to starting throughout all the knockout games. So back to the Olympics, I think that there is a lot of interest in lineups and minutes, and in particular Tatum's, because of his stature as NBA superstar and all that. And for me, I think the thing that stands out the most is that the starting lineup is not necessarily the group that's going to be finishing games. And that's what you really want to be. You want to be one of the 5 guys that's there at the end of a close game. Maybe there won't be any close games, but I think that there will be. Maybe one. I think Canada is going to be tough. They kind of have an easier bracket. If you look, they are avoiding most of the contending teams, at least the ones that we think are contending teams, until later on. And so I don't know, maybe he does play more throughout these knockout games. The fact that he did get a DNP shows me, though, that his minutes are not guaranteed, and also that Steve Kerr clearly doesn't see him as one of like the centerpieces of this team, and he hasn't played like one of the centerpieces. So yeah, I have a feeling that his minutes are going to be somewhat inconsistent throughout the knockout games. And, depending on the matchups, that might change as well. Obviously, Serbia is the team that he didn't play against last time. And so, they might face their Serbia again soon. I think Nigeria now, it looks like, is the first team that USA is going to play. Or sorry, I also cover women's. Women's is playing Nigeria. Brazil is the first team that USA is going to play. And so that's, I think that's a matchup that he'll probably play quite a bit in, but I don't know that he's one of the 5 guys that are kind of like the go-to guaranteed guys. I think those guys are going to be LeBron. I do think Curry's going to be one of those guys that he hasn't played like it, and maybe some of that is just the Steve Kerr connection. I think Anthony Davis probably has to be one of those guys, and you really want to have Drew Holiday or Derek White out there. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm really interested in how minute patterns look like during the actual playoffs, during the actual elimination games, because so far there hasn't been a whole lot of pressure, especially at this most recent game where Tatum played quite a bit. That game effectively didn't have a huge impact on anything because they'd already clinched their quarterfinal spot. So that's on that. A question here on whether the Celtics can maintain a top seed in the East to start the season without Porzingis. That's a good question. I would guess that without him, they're not going to be the number 1 seed in the East. And even though they were really good, I think they were 30-5 or something like that without him in the lineup this past year. So obviously they are capable of it, but I think that they're going to have to lean more on guys like Luke Kornet, Xavier Tillman, and Nemish Queta. And they're guys that I believe in, but they do change the complexion of like who you have out there in close games and things. Because a lot of the Celtics wins without Porzingis came in the playoffs when they were really playing a tight rotation and really leaning on Al Horford. And I don't think they're going to be doing that in the beginning of the season. I don't think Al Horford's going to be playing heavy minutes. I don't think he's definitely not going to be playing back-to-backs. He hasn't for years. So it's going to look different, to play without Porzingis, because you're going deeper into the bench, deeper into guys that are a little bit more unproven. But that's what's part of what's fun. So I would imagine the Celtics are in the top 2 or 3 seeds throughout all year, especially in the early days, and they finish, in the top 3. Maybe they don't finish number 1. But it's pretty unusual. I think the championship teams come back and finish, the first seed, just because there is that extra toll that it takes. And now you have the Olympics on top of all that. So my prediction will be that they won't be number 1, but they'll be up there. But it ultimately doesn't make a huge difference going into the playoffs, especially with just how good the Celtics have been on the road these past few years. That's been really what stood out to me, is that on the road in the playoffs, it almost doesn't even really matter. I mean, we were talking during the season about, is this team actually better without the, at home, on the road rather than at home during the playoffs? So we'll see, but that's kind of my thoughts on that. And it does sound like, from our conversations with Brad Stevens in the offseason, it does sound like, they're going to be without Porzingis until Christmas or something like that, if not later. I definitely don't think they're going to rush him back. And I do think this is the kind of injury, because there's a little bit less proven, recoveries, or it's just a rare injury. So there's not a clear blueprint of like this is exactly when he'll be back and these will be the benchmarks. So I think they're going to take it really easy on him. Got a question here about is the cost of $1 billion team sustainable? I've talked about this a little bit. I think first of all, the ownership is so in flux right now that's a little bit confusing and it's a little bit challenging to be able to figure that out because we don't know who's going to actually be paying this payroll, and obviously it's not going to be the current ownership. So you'd like to think that whoever does buy this team is buying the team with keeping these contracts on the payroll and keeping that in mind. I think when you start looking at taxes, like the cost of individual contracts is one thing, but then what the actual taxes associated with that are is just exorbitant. And so from everything that, I'm not an expert on the salary cap or contracts. I've mentioned this before, but from everything I've read and everything I've seen, it's likely that, everybody on this team is not going to play out the full length of their contract. But I don't think anything's going to happen in the next 2 years. And so I view there's a very clear 2-year window. And then who knows, maybe somebody buys this team that's a billionaire and, there's no issue with this contract and, with this payroll. So we'll see. But that is definitely something that I know has been front of mind for fans. I would just say from my standpoint, and I've seen some people that understand this a little better than me echo this, so I feel comfortable saying it. But from my standpoint, you have to just accept the fact that this is the payroll and appreciate that as a fan, you don't have to worry about this. And it's not something that, it doesn't cost you any money, doesn't cost us any money. And at the same time, it gives people, there is this continuity and this sense on this team that players aren't playing for a contract. And I do think in the past that's sometimes the number one issue in a locker room on a team is that players are playing for a contract, and everybody here is going to be locked up for the next couple of years. And, Drew Holiday has his contract extension. Derek White and Jayson Tatum both got theirs. Jaylen Brown's goes into effect next year. Al Horford is the only one that's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. He signed that 2-year extension a couple years back. And I don't know, maybe he'll come back and sign a minimum. Maybe he'll retire. Really hard to say. I have a feeling he's not going to retire, but who knows? That maybe it'll depend on how this year goes. He's been really healthy, knock on wood, for the last few years. So obviously that's something that you can't take for granted either. Okay. I have a question here about if I have any exciting guests lined up for the coming weeks. I have a couple guests that I'm excited about, other media members. But I also want to kind of go with some voices that you guys haven't heard from. I know, especially in the CLNS network, it's a lot of the media people that we hear from, a lot of similar voices and things, and you guys they're great and everybody hears from them. But I'm trying to think of how I can get some people that are not necessarily media members. So if there are any requests on people you want me to try to get on, I can certainly try. But obviously, it's tough because for players and things, that's almost impossible to get on podcasts, at least at this point, and where this podcast is at. But I will be trying to get some former players because I do think they can bring really valuable perspectives. So we'll keep you all posted. We'll probably tease some once they're lined up, but the goal is to have every Wednesday a guest. Question here about JD Davison. It says, it was interesting to see JD Davison come back on a third two-way. Do you think he had opportunities to get more minutes elsewhere, or he really wanted to come back to Boston? So my understanding, and I talked to some scouts and agents at Summer League that kind of gave me further this understanding, is that I do think JD Davison would have preferred to get a fully guaranteed contract anywhere. As you could imagine, you don't really need sources to confirm that. Obviously, if you can get a fully guaranteed contract that pays you and you're not on a two-way and you're not shuffling back and forth from a G League team, that's what you'll do. I don't think he was able to get any of those. And so that's why he's on this two-way with Boston. He's the first player ever to be on 3 consecutive two-ways. I did ask him about it in Vegas. I asked him about whether he wanted to come back to Boston. He said he really wanted to come back, and he said absolutely that was his plan. And obviously, I think he's only going to say positive things. I do think he's loved his time in Boston, and he's loved being with the other Celtics players, and obviously being there with the championship run. I'm sure that was a particularly fun experience. But someone like him, ultimately, he does ultimately want a fully guaranteed contract. That's every player's goal. And 3 is the most you can have as a two-way. So this is his last year as a two-way. So it's kind of a make or break year for him. He was drafted really young. He probably entered the draft too early, maybe not, but it certainly seems like, he's had his fair share in the G League. And he was a great G League player last year. He was on the All G League team. He helped lead the Maine Celtics to the championship game, to the finals. And I thought that in Summer League, he looked really, really good, much improved from last Summer League. So he's somebody that I think that the Celtics are high on. Brad Stevens brought this up almost unprovoked when we had a media availability with him before the draft, I believe, and we asked him about kind of re-signing Sam Hauser and other players, and he brought up JD Davison on his own accord. So that's something that stood out to me, and that's something that is really interesting that he was able to kind of, he brought up wanting to bring him back, despite the fact that we really haven't seen JD Davison at all play in Boston. And so, yeah, he's been spending all of his time in Maine. I cover a lot of Maine Celtics games. I'll be up in Maine quite a bit this year, especially monitoring the new two-way players, Anton Watson and Baylor Scheinman is on a two-way, but just monitoring those guys. I'm sure they'll both spend a lot of time in Maine, as will Jordan Walsh. Jaden Springer, I don't think will be in that group, but JD Davison probably will be if he's on the two-way. So I think one thing to look out for is he going to be a two-way like Neemias Queta was last year, where he's actually spending time in Boston, or is he going to be in Maine pretty much all year the way he was these last two seasons? I think that'll really kind of help shape what his next year or years look like. So yeah, I'm a fan of his, though. I think he's a very smart basketball player. And the key thing with him is just going to be the shot. Can he consistently shoot NBA three-pointers? And that has not been the case throughout his 2 years as the Maine Celtics. So I think if he's able to showcase the fact that he's a much improved shooter this year, that'll really go a long way. Got a question here about whether fatigue will play into the Olympians from the Celtics. I think it definitely will. You'll probably see the guys that play Olympic basketball early on rest, and maybe not play back-to-backs, play more limited minutes. But at the same time, I think guys like Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum don't like to sit out, and Jayson Tatum definitely does not like to sit out, and he's not getting a whole lot of minutes, right? I think something that's forgotten is that when he has DNPs, and when he has games that are, he's playing limited minutes, then those are minutes that aren't, are not, he's not experiencing that physical toll. We already saw Drew Holiday didn't play this most recent game. He's dealing with an ankle injury. So fatigue will play a role. I think just playing in the finals and having a deep playoff run alone plays a role into kind of impacting your following year. And we saw the year with with years with the lockout, years with COVID, the teams that play deep into the year and don't get a rest, like it does impact their abilities to repeat and to play. So I'm sure that's going to be a huge priority of the Celtics coaching staff and front office, is to keep those guys, those three in particular, Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Jayson Tatum's minutes somewhat limited, and at least in the beginning. But don't forget, they do have second half of August and September off, so they will have some time to get their legs kind of full recovery and rest. Got a question here about whether I will be a regular member of the Garden Report. I don't know that I'll be on an every Garden Report, but I definitely will be on more regularly. So I've been going on the CLNS postgame show, which is called the Garden Report, after all the Olympic games, and I also was doing that for all the Summer League games. I don't know that I'll be doing that for all these Celtics games, though. I think it'll depend. So, but yeah, it's been fun to be able to jump on and just kind of debrief in real time. But I will be doing the podcast and discussing games and all that. So regardless, I'll be doing lots of coverage and also lots of coverage with Bobby Manning and doing post-game hits. So I promise you will be able to hear from me more than you will want to. Question here about whether I cover Team USA Women's. I do. So actually, last year I was doing a full-time job in politics alongside all my Celtics coverage. This year, my full-time job is actually covering women's basketball, covering the WNBA, and I'll be covering the playoffs and everything, and also covering Team USA Women's. So I've been watching both games, both the men's and women's, watching 3-on-3 for both. So it's been a good first couple of weeks, because obviously the Olympics are super fun to watch. And the Team USA Women's, they're super fun to watch. They're very effective. I think a lot of people have thought, if Caitlin Clark was there, then more people would be watching. And in turn, I think people are almost like not watching on purpose now. But if you do decide you want to tune in, this is the week to do so. They have quarterfinal games. They have semifinals. Everything is going to be this week, same as men's. They all wrap up this weekend. And this is a team with just phenomenal players. And I think they've really figured out they didn't have as big of a learning curve as the men's team as far as figuring out how to play together. And I think a lot of it is because they actually play together for the World Cup or off years as well. So it's not like as new of a group of people, the way that the men's team kind of feels like the Avengers have assembled, and this is their first time playing together. But yeah, Jackie Young of the Las Vegas Aces had 19 points today. She's one of the best two-way guards in the WNBA, and she's really someone that is fun to watch, and she kind of had a breakout game today. So yeah, we're going to take a quick ad break, and then I'll be right back to answer some more questions.
I love going to MLB games during the summer. I love going to concerts, games, sporting events, and there's no better way to get tickets to all of those events than the Game Time app. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. You can download the Game Time app, you can see any event that you search, you can put the location in, where you're based, see upcoming concerts, sporting events, whatnot, and get the best deals, best prices guaranteed. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. On top of the fact that it's already a really good deal, download the app, terms apply, redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Okay, so yeah, I do actually use Game Time quite a bit, so it's a very legitimate ad. Okay, I'm gonna continue to answer some of these questions. Question here about Kada. Is Kada expected to be in the rotation next season? I do think that Kada will be in the rotation next season, and the reason I think that is because he was almost in the rotation last season, like he was very much on the fringe, and there was even that road trip around Christmas time when he was still a two-way that he played critical minutes on Christmas Day and against the Lakers and was really kind of instrumental in some of those wins. I thought whenever he was in Boston for extended minutes, he looked really good. He played Summer League. He played a couple games, and DJ McClay, who's the head coach of the Summer League team and is one of the top assistants on the Celtics, he kind of talked a little bit about this and said that the part of why they wanted Kada to play Summer League is so that he could practice different defensive schemes. And so they kind of tried a lot of different changes and going from different kinds of defenses to kind of keep him up to speed on those things. And I think that they're doing everything they can to prepare him to be a rotation player. They signed him to a 3-year partially guaranteed contract. From the beginning, I think from when he was a two-way, and they talked about it, kind of how much they like what he's bringing to the table, the defensive ceiling and also the rebounding, the ability to follow his own shot, to be a lob threat. I think there's a lot of things to like about him. Really hard worker, was super dominant as a G League player. So I think he's made clear that he'll be an NBA player as well. So we'll see. Porzingis being out opens the door for some of these players. I don't think Tillman is a guy that's going to be playing super extended minutes. So I think Kada, Tillman, and Cornette are going to be sharing the front court minutes, and Kada will probably play a significant role there. Okay, question about Jaden Springer, and are you high on his potential to impact winning for us this year and beyond? I'm super high on Jaden Springer. I've talked a little bit about this. I've shared about how I think he is defensively an NBA, not only like an NBA ready player, but I think he's like an elite defender in the NBA already. So if he started playing more significant minutes, I think we'd see that right away. But at the same time, I think offensively he's much improved, and it's a limited sample because he didn't even really play in the G League this year. He played one game with the Maine Celtics, and that was only because they were already in Atlanta for a kind of two game stint. But then he played one Summer League game, and in both of those games, I saw that he can definitely score very effectively at the G League, Summer League level. And we already know that because he was a Finals MVP from a couple years back. And so he's shown offensively that he can keep up with anybody. If he can start shooting and consistently hitting threes, then I think he has a spot on the team right away, honestly, in some capacity to alleviate minutes from the guards who are both coming off Olympic runs. I think he's ahead of like a JD Davison type player. And so it's, Pritchard's going to have a big role this year. But Springer might have some minutes to augment here and there if they're really limiting Drew Holiday and Derek White. That's going to kind of what it's going to come down to. There's a chance they don't limit them that substantially, in which case I don't know that Jaden Springer has minutes to play this year. This is a really tough team to break into the rotation. So I think for him, it would be great if he was able to play on like the Pistons or play somewhere where there's like a whole lot of opportunities, but that's not where he's at right now. And so for me, I think Jaden Springer is somebody that is ready for NBA minutes, but here is just maybe not the place where you can break through. But if it's not this year, I think in the next few years, he will be an NBA player in a rotation. kind of making a significant impact. So I'm really high on him. I've talked about this a little bit. He's one of the players that if I had to like place a bet, I would say he's going to make it in the NBA, and he's going to make it as a really effective role player. Like, I don't want to say Avery Bradley because that's a high bar, but I think he's a good enough scorer in theory. Like, he hasn't shown that yet in the NBA, but defensively is really where he's going to make his mark. And before he got traded to Boston, I don't know if people remember this, but he guarded Steph Curry and Luka in back-to-back games and was super effective in both of those games. So, he has a track record when you put him on a star that he has the physical tools, and it's really obvious when you watch him in Summer League. Like, he's a guy that makes people miserable defensively. Over 55 wins. I'm going to say it's going to be around 55, but if I had to guess, I'll say under. That'll be my prediction. Question about what are you most excited about for this upcoming season? I think honestly what I'm the most excited about is being able to cover basketball full time, because last year, like, I was at the NBA finals and I was also working full time for my 9-to-5 job. So I was getting up really early and it was just really crazy. And I think there were a lot of stories that I wanted to pursue that I wasn't able to because I was just juggling so much. And I think just covering basketball full time this year, I'm excited to be able to dive deeper into things. I'm not going to have like conflicts with practice, or there were a lot of times where I would like go to practice, then I'd have calls I need to take, so I wouldn't be able to cover things. And so, yeah, excited for that on a personal level. I think on a team level, that's maybe more applicable to you guys. What I'm really excited about is the ability to watch a team that doesn't have to constantly deal with like the criticism of this isn't a championship team, because they're literally bringing back the exact same team. So even if they don't win this year, even if they have a much worse season than they had this last year, we can't say from like a discourse standpoint, like this team can't win, because they've already shown us that this exact group has won, and has won the championship with ease at a pretty historic level, after a pretty historic season. So that's what stands out to me. That's what I'm excited about, is being able to just watch this team. But honestly, like, I thoroughly enjoyed this past year, and I'm just ready to get back into it, honestly. Being able to kind of be at TD Garden is my favorite thing. My favorite part of all of it is just being able to be there, be at games, and be able to tell stories that aren't necessarily being told. There's a lot of philanthropic work that I'm excited about. I'm sure many of you guys saw Jaylen Brown announced his new charity, Boston Exchange, which is kind of going to help provide grants to underserved communities, and he's partnering with Drew Holiday, who's done some really amazing philanthropic work for a couple of years now. So all that to say is I'm excited for everything that we experienced this past year, but I think with a little bit less doubt this upcoming season. I think it's fun to be able to just talk about basketball and talk about games without having to like proclaim that like Tatum isn't a winner or Brown can't be on a championship team, because all of those narratives I think are done now. Okay, looking through some of these questions. Question here about, do you think KP being down through December or longer could open the door for Tatum to put up MVP type numbers? I think the only thing that will make Tatum be like a real MVP candidate, is if he starts shooting at a really effective clip. Like, if he starts to hit his threes at a really good rate, like if he goes to like a 40% from three season next year, then you're going to see him put up MVP type numbers. And I don't know that has to do with Porzingis being available or not. Certainly he's going to get more shots, and that helps. But I think the knock on him compared to other candidates is that offensively he's a little bit less efficient. And he does take some difficult shots, and that's part of it. And there is way more to the game than just scoring and just shooting and just field goal percentage. But I think unless he's able to put up, like he's able to shoot at a really effective clip, then I just don't think that he's going to be able to really make a strong case. And it certainly doesn't help that his own teammate, Jaylen Brown, was finals MVP last year. It doesn't help that he has so much talent on his roster. And I feel like people are only going to appreciate and recognize that talent even more next year, now that Drew Holiday and Derek White are kind of showcasing at the Olympic level just how effective they are and how they're maybe some of the best guards in the world, really, which I don't know if people realized that 6 months ago. So I don't think Porzingis being out is going to be enough to really convince the world that Tatum is an MVP type player. But I do think that if he can start shooting threes at a really high clip, which he hasn't for a while, that'll really go a long way. So that's kind of the main thing there. Question from RJ Johnson about, do you think Jake Scrubb will work his way up to a contract with the Celtics this year? I don't know that I do. The one two-way that I think is a little bit in flux is Drew Peterson. He is his second year on a two-way with the Celtics. And I think he's a guy that I see his potential. I think he's a kind of a guy that can do everything well. But he has to show that he's an outstanding main Celtic player to be able to keep that two-way. I could see a world where maybe Jay Scrubb replaces him. For those of you that don't remember Jay Scrubb, he was a standout from Summer League last year. He was maybe even the most impressive player on the Summer League team. And this was right before I started covering the team, but I remember watching all the games and saying, like, this guy has to be an NBA player, right? And he actually, I saw Bobby Manning did a Boston Sports Journal piece on Jay Scrubb. He spoke with him exclusively, and I think he's signing an Exhibit 10 contract and talked about how what went wrong last year, which if you guys don't remember Jay Scrubb, he did get a two-way. He was on the Celtics, and then during preseason, during training camp, I believe he tore his ACL, and so he was immediately waived. I think he still hung out around the team quite a bit, but obviously for a player like him, that's so devastating to be in that position where you are just barely in the NBA. You know, if a star tears their ACL, like the team obviously will wait for him and believe in him. But I think a guy like Jay Scrubb was waived, and I didn't know if we were going to see him again. I know fans have asked about him quite a bit. His agency posted on Instagram a couple weeks ago. I shared that out that he'll be returning to Boston. And so I think he'll be a guy that's in Maine quite a bit. So anything can happen once you're up there. So maybe he does nag one of those two ways. Maybe he plays really well with the Maine Celtics and some other team signs him. So I think that second option is probably more likely. But yeah, he seemed like a great player. He was just a very electric scorer. That's what I remember most about him. And that he really impressed during his time with the Maine Celtics last year. A question here from Celtics Digest. Do you think we will see something similar to last year with 14 guys and then 3 two-ways and then saving the last spot just in case a two-way guy stands out, similar to Keita? I do think that the one roster spot that's open and available right now will remain open and available. I actually asked Brad Stevens about this in Summer League, and it was like his last media availability, I think, until training camp. And he said that last roster spot, I asked him specifically about O'Shea Brissett and if he might return, and it sounded like that was a no. And I think O'Shea Brissett has kind of made that seem like it was a no on his blog recently. But I think they want the 14 spots with one open in case somebody goes down, somebody gets injured. Maybe they need another front court player if Keita and Cornet are not doing are not sufficiently filling that gap that Porzingis is going to leave. Or maybe somebody else gets hurt, knock on wood. Again, I don't want to put that out there, but that's always a possibility. So I think they like the flexibility of keeping that spot open. And then when you're doing kind of midseason things, whether that's a midseason trade, it gives you a little bit more flexibility that you have that spot. The other thing is that maybe they will convert one of the two-way guys. I see a world where JD Davison is like really trying to get a full contract spot. I don't think that he's going to get it in Boston, but it's a possibility. So Keita, I think from the beginning, everybody was kind of like, when is this guy's contract going to get converted? Because there was just a need for his style of player on this team. I don't think we're going to see something like that here. But at the same time, I do think they'll keep that spot open, whether that's for a two-way or otherwise. Okay, I see some, this was from a while back, but I was talking about Jaden Springer and Avery Bradley. I see that other people are seeing that comparison. Question about what's the biggest threat to the Celtics going into next season. I think the biggest threat is, again, I think I mentioned this, but health and just not getting complacent, because last year there was this like collective unity around like, we are going to win a championship. We're going to do everything we can to win a championship. And it became like an obsession where nothing else mattered. Individual accolades didn't matter. There was full buy-in. You could see that from guy 1 through 15. And so to be able to maintain that is difficult. And so I'm curious about whether they'll be able to. And so I think health is obviously number one, because, they've been relatively healthy in recent years. Even Porzingis being out, like everybody else is healthy, that puts them in good position. But yeah. Oh, I'm just realizing this question says, who's the biggest threat? Okay. Who's the biggest threat? I guess that still gave you guys some perspective, but who's the biggest threat? I would say is probably whoever they see in the finals, whoever that ends up being, whether that's the Thunder or the Nuggets or the Wolves, like that to me is probably the most formidable opponent. In the Eastern Conference, though, the Knicks stand out to me the most. The 76ers just don't scare me. And honestly, watching Embiid in the Olympic play, he hasn't been terrible, but he's not really instilling fear as an opponent. And I think the 76ers obviously have Maxey, who I do think is going to be a tremendous player and already is. But I would pick the Knicks in the Eastern Conference as the most likely team to eliminate the Celtics, just because they don't really have any major weaknesses. They have a very deep roster and guys that have already shown that they step up to the moment. Question about what I only cover basketball. So I just cover the WNBA in the NBA offseason. I cover the Olympics when that's happening. So I just cover professional basketball year round, both WNBA and NBA. Question here about what Jaylen and Jayson can improve the most as they move into their primes. I think for me, the number one thing that they can both improve on, for Tatum, actually, I think it's probably two different things, but for Tatum, it's probably the outside shooting, just the efficiency. And it's not that he's even that inefficient. But I think the number one thing that I think for him has been a weakness is games where he's struggling to score. And you look at individual games where he's like 2 for 10 from 3. Those are the kinds of things where either he's going to just become a better shooter, which I don't know if that's the case. He's obviously been struggling of late, or he's just going to eliminate a few of those shots. So it's not a massive thing. And I don't want to nitpick his game because I do think he's a little bit unfairly discussed sometimes. And unfairly scrutinized. And certainly as of late, he's been unfairly scrutinized, I think, with this whole Olympic run. But I think that he's improved a lot as a passer, he's improved a lot as a defender. His rebounding is elite. He was the top rebounder for the U.S. Olympics team yesterday. So the number one thing that I would say is just if he can trim down a couple of those bad shots a night, just become a little bit more of an efficient player. And then probably maybe number one for him is down the stretch. I think he didn't hit a game winner this year. He attempted quite a few. So whether that's him hitting those game winners down the stretch, or it's him passing to somebody else and not missing those shots, I think that the one stain on his season that he had this year was the fact that he wasn't the most efficient when it came down to late game shots. And that was something the Celtics actually were pretty good at, especially in the playoffs. They won all those close games. But I think as an individual, that's one thing for him to improve on. The other thing for Jaylen Brown, it has to be free throws. I was certain that his free throw struggles were at some point going to come back to bite him, and they didn't. And so there was never a game where he lost a free throw in the playoffs. He missed 2 free throws in the playoffs. He actually hit some clutch free throws in the playoffs. But that is the number one thing that I think he has to improve on, just because a guy like him is going to continue to go downhill quite a bit. He's going to continue to get hit, continue to get fouled. And the fact that he is able to draw that contact, you want to make sure that he can then hit those free throws. So that's the number one thing for Jaylen Brown. Question here about Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard. Obviously, they both are, Sam Hauser signed a contract extension this offseason. Pritchard signed one right before the season, so they both have that long-term security. I think you're going to see a lot of what we saw from them last year. Sam Hauser got better defensively last year. That's going to be a key point for him, is to continue to get better. Pritchard, I think, is going to be all about running that second unit, and maybe he's going to see increased minutes with Drew Holiday and Derek White coming off an Olympic run, which they're both kind of major contributors in. So maybe Pritchard plays even more, but I don't expect like a huge jump from either of them. I think they both were at a pretty good place last year, and were able to kind of contribute and be effective playoff contributors, which was the most important thing. But yeah, I do think that Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard are both guys that are going to be really, really instrumental to what this team was able to accomplish this year, especially as they think about kind of the load managing minutes. And there's going to be some surprise contributors. I think Keita is one that I'm expecting to play real minutes and to make an impact. But Hauser and Pritchard solidified themselves as two of the most important bench pieces last year, and I think they'll just kind of continue to build upon that. I'm going to answer one more question, and then we'll wrap it up, and then this will be posted on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. So again, please do subscribe if you're able to. It's You Got Boston is my YouTube channel. You can also subscribe on CLNS and CLNS Media, CLNS All Access. And then there's obviously this on Spotify and Apple. So yeah, I really appreciate everybody tuning in. I'm going to just do one more question. I see a couple questions here about the coaching staff. One is about with the loss of coaching. Obviously, they lost Charles Lee, which was the big one, but Jermaine Buckner, they also lost. The main Celtics head coach, Blaine Miller, also went to Charlotte with them. So a couple of guys left, but everybody else was pretty much the same. I was kind of surprised with the crew that was in Summer League. It was a lot of the same players, a lot of the same coaches. Sam Cassell still in the mix. DJ McClay is going to be up there. He was obviously coached Maine, so that's a big kind of show confidence in him. Matt Reynolds is someone that I got to know at Summer League. I didn't know much before, but obviously he's in charge of the timeouts, but and the challenges. So people kind of know him from, for being the challenges guy. But he's somebody else that I think is really veteran. He's the most veteran guy in the roster on the coaching staff, 11 years. So that certainly stands out. Tony Dobbins is another one that's very veteran, 8 years. So those are all guys that people are going to become increasingly familiar with. Obviously, Sam Cassell is one that's going to move up immediately with Charles Lee being gone. And they're going to bring in probably a few new coaches, but that hasn't been announced yet. And I don't know that I have like a specific person in mind that I'm like, this person is what they're missing. I think they really want to one thing that Brad has talked about quite a bit is that they want to bring people on and then kind of move people up the totem pole. So rather than bring in somebody to become the lead assistant, I think that their goal is to bring somebody in and kind of develop them the same way that the players are being developed. So we shall see who those new additions end up being. I just want to thank you all for tuning in. This is going to be every Sunday, a mailbag edition. If I didn't get to your question, feel free to message me. I can answer on Twitter as well. And I will be, if you're just tuning in, you can go back and watch the full stream. This will be posted on YouTube, on Twitter, everywhere. So you can find everything there, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But again, really appreciate you all tuning in. I'm sure there's going to be more and more questions as the year goes on and there's more to talk about, but the Olympics are pretty entertaining and we have a lot of Celtics players that are kind of right in the middle of things that make this really exciting. So appreciate you all tuning in. Like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, and have a great rest of your week.